So what Objectivism does is it has its claim that it puts forward publicly. Existence exists. Existence exists. They talk about this all the time. It's the axiom of Objectivism. But snuck in there is this claim, well, there is nothing outside of existence. There's no supernatural that exists. And that's a more controversial claim because there's claims of supernatural events all the time. I mean, the entirety of Christianity was based on a claim of the supernatural. So outside of this, so they go from this starting with there's no supernatural possible, and when you attack that, they run back to, oh, are you claiming that existence doesn't exist? That's absurd. It's a basic self-evident axiom.
What is meant by the supernatural? Well, supposedly, it is a realm which transcends nature. What is nature? Nature is existence, the sum of that which is. It is usually called nature when you think of it as a system of interconnected, interacting entities governed by law. So nature really means the universe of entities acting and interacting in accordance with their identities. What then is supernature? Something beyond the universe, beyond entity, beyond identity. A form of existence beyond existence. A kind of entity beyond anything man knows about entities. A something which contradicts everything man knows about the identity of reality. In short, a contradiction of every metaphysical ascension.
And a similar thing happens with A is A and there's no miracles possible. Oftentimes they use the law of identity to explain because A is A cannot be non-A, so no miracles are possible. Now, this is not a statement that logically follows. I can get to that in a different video, but I want to explain here. You're starting with something self-evident. A is A. Everybody agrees A equals A. 1 equals 1. Duh. That's obvious. But the additional conclusion that's being snuck in there is the idea no miracles are possible. And if you disagree with that, you're disagreeing with A as A. You're being unreasonable. So there's these presuppositions here baked into reason. And importantly, these presuppositions come without a justification.
Now, if miracle means simply the unusual, then of course it has no supernatural implication. But the actual meaning of miracle is that which is impossible by the nature of the entity involved. If you have a rock, you scoop it out and you fill it with Coca-Cola, you conceal it, and you have a complex system of pulleys which respond to your touch so that Coca-Cola gushes out. That is unusual. But if you have a rock that is filled with plain rock and you touch it and Coca-Cola gushes out, that is a miracle. And the difference is that the second is impossible. A miracle is an action that is not based on or expressive of the nature of the entity that acts. And for this reason, it means it's a violation of identity. It's impossible, and therefore this one is up. Now you get the idea.
And this is arguably a more important question. The question of reason and faith, where you're starting from, is going to kind of determine your answer to whether there's a God or no God. Now, similar to reason, faith does have a certain conclusion generally. It generally will conclude that there is a God. However, it's not denying that fact. It's not hiding the fact that it relies on, that it leads to one sort of conclusion. So Kierkegaard, in his conceptualization, argues that we don't have a basis to make this decision between reason and faith, but this decision is ultimately more important because it's really the decision that makes you decide whether there's a God or no God. And we can't use reason to justify this decision. What reason are you using to justify whether you chose reason over faith? You don't have a reason to do that. If you use it, it's completely circular. There's no way to make this justification.
Now contrast this with the approach of objectivism. On the primacy of existence, knowledge can be gained in only one way: by the study of existence, by looking outwards at reality. There can be no appeal to divine revelations, no burrowing into human consciousness to study its content or structure as the ultimate basis of knowledge of the world, no survey of social purposes or linguistic habits, no appeal to whim, whether divine, social, or personal. Knowledge has to begin by observing facts, in other words, existence. And then every step must be dictated thereafter by facts of existence. And this, of course, is what it means for objectivism to function by reason. Last time we mentioned Ayn Rand's definition of reason as the faculty which identifies and integrates the material provided by man's senses. Well, reason, in the context of our present perspective, is the method of knowing existence which is based on and derived from facts of existence in regard to its starting data and every aspect of its subsequent method. It's the method based on facts as against the feelings, urges, or what have you of any or every consciousness. Reason, in short, is man's faculty of knowing existence. It's the faculty which starts with facts and proceeds at each step thereafter in accord with facts. It is the existence-oriented faculty. Now, if you understood what is meant by reason, you would see then that you cannot ask, why should I accept reason? That means, why should I accept facts? Why should I accept reality? The answer is, there is nothing else. Existence exists, and it is what we are trying to know. Now, the alternative to exclusive reliance on reason is the theory of mysticism. The theory that knowledge is possible to man by means other than reason, by some non-sensory, non-rational means of knowledge. And there are endless variants, such as revelation from God, faith, intuition, instinct, hunch, social consensus, collective unconsciousness, LSD-inspired trance, dialectic triad, etc., etc. Now, what is common to all of these variants? In fact, there's only one thing which the mystic actually appeals to, and that is feeling, his emotion. That, in fact, is all that's left when you discard the sensory conceptual side of consciousness. And the evidence of this is simply ask a mystic, for instance, how do you know a true revelation as distinct from a false one? There is no test, no standard, no criterion. Simply, he feels that this is the correct one. And the same obviously applies to how does he know he has the right intuition as against somebody's contradictory one, etc. Regardless of what complexities any particular mystic theory may involve or invoke, mysticism comes down to the view that feelings, emotions, are valid tools of knowledge. Mysticism is not an issue of the content of a person's ideas, but of the means of reaching and validating that content. For instance, the belief in God is mistaken, but it is not necessarily a sign of mysticism. For instance, Thomas Aquinas attempted to give arguments to prove the existence of God. He was appealing to reason. By objectivist viewpoint, he is mistaken, but that is not a mystic as method. A mystic would be, on using this example, a person who says he knows that God exists on faith, by feeling, without the attempt at argumentation.
To this, and I think for me, I had this conception of reason that arbitrarily, without justification, I realized excluded the possibility of supernaturals, the supernatural, miracles, different things like that outside of like naturalistic assumptions about the world, that the world is purely physical. There's like a consciousness according to objectivism, obviously, but explanations need to be from sort of a naturalistic perspective. And there's some ambiguity with that with objectivism itself, but the idea is it's still true. They don't view it there as any sort of supernatural or miracles. So what I realized is, based on these presuppositions of reason, I had arbitrarily, by just my assumptions of reason itself, excluded a certain path. I excluded the possibility of God even. So when I was considering these questions, there was no path for me to go down to find God. Even if God sat on the table in front of me, appeared to me, said, I am God, Jesus is my son, blah, 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 I would have been like, oh, I was hallucinating, or the light refracted through the air in a certain way and made this thing appear. Like, I would have gone straight to a scientific explanation rather than explanation that something supernatural or miraculous happened.
God as traditionally defined, and I'm here taking the religious terminology and language straight. In other words, a supernatural, infinite, omnipotent creator is a systematic contradiction of every valid metaphysical principle. Now, the point here is broader than just the Judeo-Christian concept of God, although it does apply to that. There is no argument that will get you from this world to a supernatural world. No reason that will lead you to a world contradicting this one. No method of inference to enable you to leap from existence to a super-existence. Existence exists, and only existence exists. Existence is a primary. It is uncreated, indestructible, eternal. So if you are to postulate something beyond existence, some supernatural realm, you must do it by openly rejecting reason, dispensing with definitions, proofs, arguments, and saying flatly, to hell with argument, I have faith. Now that, of course, is a willful rejection of reason if you do it, and as such is not properly to be discussed by any advocate of reason. Even so, I'll say something about faith under epistemology next week. For now, however, I say merely this. Objectivism advocates reason as man's sole means of knowledge. And therefore, for the reasons I've already given, it is atheist. It denies any supernatural dimension presented as a contradiction of nature, of existence. And this applies not only to God, but to every variant of the supernatural ever advocated or to be advocated. And I trust I don't have to run through the whole litany. Objectivism is also a gremlinist, and a devilist, and a demonist, and a poltergeistist, etc. In other words, we accept reality, and that's all.